The best and worst GMs, front offices in the NFL. Who's underrated, who's overrated, building their NFL teams in their NFL cities on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love our everydayers, and we always love it when you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is sponsored by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. We are not ranking GMs today, but we're going to utilize the help of NBC Sports. Pat Doherty, Roto Pat as he is sometimes known, has a ranking of NFL GMs around the league. And we're going to go through this list and give our opinions on where we think these team builders are ranked. And, you know, some teams are, we have to start with this and preface. Yeah. Something interesting that you brought up. How different do you think GM rankings and owner rankings are, and how related those things are in the NFL, and maybe some GMs that might have a little bit more difficult path to being a good GM and team building just because of the team he works for?
Yeah. So Pat Doherty, who wrote this, and he goes by Roto Pat. They used to be Roto World over there. He does head coaches and GM rankings every season. And I happened to be listening to their podcast like 2 days ago, and he flat out said this was harder this year than ever, because usually there's 4 or 5 easy ones that you can just put at the bottom, you know, guys that are pretty easy to beat up on. And I don't envy him at all for this. I think head coaches would be easier than GMs. They're more in the forefront. You see them on game day, you know, when you flip on the TV at 1 Eastern or whatever, they're out there making decisions. But GMs, to your point, first of all, when we go through this list, a lot of it's going to be body of work. If you've done it a long time, if you have a lot of wins under your belt, you've had a successful organization, that is big. And also, every organization is structured differently. I can't stress this enough. I mean, there are 32 independent organizations all handling their business differently. And of course, that stems from ownership. And some owners are more hands-on. Some are more willing to spend. You know, a lot of people don't talk enough about cash spending. We talk about salary cap, but cash spending, teams like the Eagles and Browns spend more money than most, and that's an advantage. You know, you can structure things that way. Small example, of course, I'll bring it back to the Steelers. So the Steelers back in the 50s traded a first-round pick to the Bears that ended up either being Gale Sayers or Dick Butkus. You know, they drafted both those guys the same years. And after it was the 60s, I guess. After many, many years of being the worst organization in the league, the chief, the original Mr. Rooney, said, we are not trading first-round picks ever again. We've not done this forever for old guys. And so they went decades without trading a first-round pick, until Kevin Colbert goes to Mr. Rooney, generations down, and says, we have to trade our first-round pick for this Minkah Fitzpatrick guy. I know it's not what we do, but that took a lot of convincing. You go to the end of the hall, and somebody's going to say yay or nay, and it's the guy that writes the checks that you work for. So if he says no, Minkah Fitzpatrick's not a Steeler. You know what I mean? Like, and there's a million examples of that. And some owners are good, some are not, you know?
And some meddle, some make big decisions. The Johnny Manziel thing comes to mind for Cleveland Browns. He wanted the star name. He wanted the quarterback in the first round. Ownership wanted that. You know, the Carolina Panthers
sell jerseys, you know?
Right. Yeah. And so big decisions, ownership is involved. Sometimes there's a VP that's kind of acting for the ownership. That's kind of a quasi GM as well. I think about the Dallas Cowboys and what they have to do in the near future, just monetarily, because you think, okay, salary cap, you have the salary cap and you can pay guys to the salary cap. Well, they've got to pay potentially a massive contract to a quarterback, a massive contract to a wide receiver, and a massive contract to a defensive end. 49ers are going through this as well. They have to have an insane amount of cash on hand to pay out those contracts. And you've got to put money in escrow to cover the guarantees of a $200 million contract, right? That's not easy. You've got to be willing to do that as ownership and willing to throw down the money and have the money laying around to do some of those things. The Raiders didn't have enough money to fire a head coach recently because of how much money that would cost to pay the old guy still because of those contracts, and then hire a new guy and have all the cash on hand to do these things. So operating costs is kind of crazy, and owners need to be willing to do that.
Yeah, right. And sorry to interrupt, but the Cowboys, for this exercise, their GM is listed as Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones.
Right.
Well, they also own the team. You know what I mean? They don't have a GM. And a lot of these GMs, of course, a lot of them have a scouting background or came up through the scouting ranks. That's a traditional way of doing things. But more and more, you're getting money guys that handle the cap and have a great understanding that way. Some of them are just businessmen that manage generally. You know what I mean? Like, general manager is a very broad term.
Yeah, it's not called specific manager. It's general manager. Right.
Some of it's, I'm going to manage what goes on in the cafeterias and the weight room, and I manage the entire organization generally and hire good people.
It is hard to argue with RotoPat here at NBCSports.com that the combination of Andy Reid, Brett Veach, and that partnership has been pretty amazing and brought home hardware in the NFL. And it's pretty hard to argue that they're not number one in the NFL right now.
Right. And I'm sure there's people out there going, well, what if we would have lucked into Mahomes? We would have done this too. And actually, I don't think Veach drafted Mahomes, from what I remember.
So this is the way it went. He wasn't the GM then. It was
I should know that. Yeah.
It was he was with the Browns as well. But
he was with the team.
Crusty old GM. Who am I thinking of now? That was the GM at the time. He went. He was either with the Browns immediately before or immediately after the Chiefs.
I should know that too, but
I'm blanking on his name. We can look it up here. But essentially, it was being transitioned into Brett Veach's job, and he wasn't technically the GM at the time, but he was the point man for Patrick Mahomes. Like, Brett Veach was the reason the Kansas City Chiefs went and got Patrick Mahomes, and they traded up for him. So
that's what I say. They didn't luck,
but they targeted Mahomes and went to get their guy. And look, Andy Reid, to his credit, is maybe a little bit more of a gambler, but Andy Reid, and we saw it in this draft, they moved up a couple of times to get specific players with high upside that they wanted for their football team. But some people are good gamblers and some people are bad gamblers. So sometimes being a gambler is a terrible thing and you're in debt. Sometimes being a gambler is how you really get a payoff here. And the Chiefs have been really good gamblers when they have gambled and have put together an awesome roster. And Brett Veach's first real action as being in charge of that roster was going to get Patrick Mahomes. And they nailed that, and it's made other things a little bit easier. So I can get that argument that, okay, once you got Patrick Mahomes, it was on you. Great job. But it has made other things a little bit easier.
Yeah. I mean, once you have Mahomes and he's the best quarterback in the league, I'm holding better cards in my hand than you are if we're both GMs. I mean, there's just no way around that. Not everyone's dealt the same hand any year. I mean, sometimes you get a bunch of 2s and 3s and you got nothing you can do with it. I mean, that's bound to happen. And that's why these guys that have lasted is a little bit better evaluation. The only thing I want to throw out with the Chiefs, which they've managed incredibly well, and I give Reid all the credit for this, but it might bite him in the ass someday, in the butt, sorry. They take character risks. I mean, they just do. They are willing to turn the other cheek probably more than any team in the league, starting with Tyreek Hill.
Right. And that was starting before that was an Andy Reid thing from before he was
coach
of the Kansas City Chiefs. John Dorsey is the GM I was thinking of. John Dorsey. So he basically left the organization in June of that year, right after the draft, right after the draft of Patrick Mahomes. And it's like the torch was kind of passed already that offseason to Brett Veach as being in charge of the Kansas City Chiefs roster. So from then on, they've absolutely been the best front office in the NFL.
Yeah.
Number 2 on the list is the San Francisco 49ers combination of, again, head coach and GM. And both of these teams, the head coach was the hire and brought in their own GM, right? And so Andy Reid's, if Andy Reid wants something, he gets it, but he's done a good job of allowing Brett Veach to go be in charge of that portion of the offseason. Kyle Shanahan's similar. Kyle Shanahan's at the top of the pyramid. If he wants to go get a wide receiver, and maybe the scouts don't have him as high as other guys, John Lynch is going to go get him the wide receiver that he wants because he's in charge of the 53-man roster. But they've had a really good working relationship. The 49ers are the most interesting team to me, not because I cover them, but because they've not been great in early rounds of the draft, but have been the best team in the league on day 3. And so to me, I think how good Kyle Shanahan is as a coach and their program there has helped them look better team building than maybe they actually are, because they've done some really weird things and lit some really premium draft picks on fire, but then they went and got a 7th round franchise quarterback too. So, I mean, it's kind of, you would not teach this. This would not be the blueprint on how to build a team. I think the blueprint is how you put together the structure to allow yourself to have some flexibility and miss some picks and then hit on some later picks.
Yeah, I was curious. I mean, I'm not sure I'd put them 2, but there's a lot of interesting things they do too. I mean, you go trade for the best left tackle in the league and the best running back in the league, and that overcomes some draft problems as well. And
being competitive, I think, is a big part of it. They're like, look,
the
best player in the league's available. We're going to be in on that, right? Yeah. We're trying to be good. And so it's hard to argue with the end result of how good the roster is, even though the path was really unorthodox for the 49ers. They do have maybe the best roster in the NFL.
And I meant to say it's open the show, but obviously Shanahan and Lynch have a very good working relationship. But there's a lot of organizations where the head coach trumps the GM too. So, I mean, it's hard if you're third on the list as a GM behind the head coach and the owner, it's hard to rank you on this thing. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and it's hard for you to accomplish maybe your vision because you're accomplishing somebody else's vision.
Go get this done. All right, I got it done, sir. Thanks. You know,
the name at number 3 is probably one that, Matt, you might want to put above the 49ers and deserves to be in this conversation as the number 1 GM currently in the NFL if we were just drafting GMs. We'll get to that name and some of the bottom of the list as well next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is sponsored by Game Time. When you download the Game Time app, our listeners get a special offer $20 off for our listeners with their first ticket purchase. And Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. We're talking killer last-minute deals for all of the sports, NBA, WNBA, Major League Baseball games, concerts, comedy shows, theater events, whatever sporting event or show or whatever it is you want to go to near you, you can find those tickets and get killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and Game Time's lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying all of those tickets. Up to 60% off buying those last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. And I love the view from your seat, a panoramic view. You pull up the seat, you move your phone around, and you're like, okay, this is what it looks like sitting in these seats. No surprises, no surprise fees at checkout with Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets and more with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Howie Roseman comes in at number 3 on this list. And I think most people, if you just said really quick, best GM in the NFL, Howie Roseman would be the most popular name that comes up.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I would have him too. We're splitting hairs, of course. These are very successful organizations. And this is the case really with every head coach and every GM every year. But this is going to be a pivotal year in Roseman's legacy. You know, you swap out coordinators, you change how you do things a little bit. But I love his vision for team building. And by that, I mean lineman. You know, and I adore that. I think that's what I would do if I was in charge of a team. And I also want to give him a lot of credit for, like you could say, Veach lucked into Mahomes, which he really didn't. But the Niners lucked into Purdy, which is kind of true. But the Eagles handling the Wentz-Hurts thing wasn't luck at all. It was masterful.
Right, and allowing yourself to move on of players when you need
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
just, not afraid like, how many trades he makes,
I love
comes out
that.
looking
Yeah.
like he won so many of those trades. That's not that easy to do, so clearly a smart guy, and, there's been ups and downs there through his tenure, but to build yourself 2 separate Super Bowl rosters with, some players that were common, but
Not a
2
ton.
pretty
Yeah.
different rosters. That's rare and hard to do. So, yeah, but I would not fight you if you said Howie Roseman deserves to be even number 1 on the list, but clearly he's at the top of the league.
Yeah.
And he's the GM, unlike some of these other
GM,
teams
yeah.
where it's a coach GM combination.
Exactly. Like this next one, the Rams. I mean,
Right.
and there's something to be said for that. I mean, the Niners, the Rams, they develop, and the Chiefs, they develop talent really well. So maybe I'll take more raw players if my coaching staff's great at developing players.
It helps when you have a great coaching staff. It's going to make your football team better. And I talk about this a lot. It was like, if I'm a player, and look, there's been obvious misses for the 49ers, but I want to go to a team like the 49ers, the Chiefs, the Ravens, because you just have a higher chance of success in the NFL
doubt.
if you're drafted by those teams.
100%. 100%. I mean,
I have
do.
a problem. I have a problem with the Rams being this high.
Do you?
This has been my thing with the Rams. And I do think that I think Sean McVay is one of the best coaches in the NFL.
100%.
But their team build, now Aaron Donald Les Snead drafted Aaron Donald, right? But Sean McVay wasn't there when that happened.
McVay definitely was not there.
Yes. But I believe Snead was still the GM there. So he gets credit there. But the Stars and Scrubs team build that the Rams put together, they got a Super Bowl, so they have an ultimate scoreboard. Like, hey, we got our Super Bowl.
Right.
But I do think that's it's a little bit of a shortcut. Put it this way: any team in the NFL could just trade all their picks for the best players they can get for them, and probably have a flash where they're a little bit better football team.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just willing to pay more for stuff, I don't think that makes you savvy necessarily. So that's kind of the problem I have with the way they've built that team. And I think a lot of the success they've had is because of coaching. And then they just, probably made, poor decisions in a lot of cases to go get guys in the long term because of, getting rid of first round picks. And it helped and it worked for the short term, but it's just not the way you build things in the long term. And I think they're still going to have a rough road. No Aaron Donald, and we'll see how things go at quarterback. Their path was not savvy. It was aggressive. And I don't think that makes them great necessarily. Not the worst, obviously not the worst front office in the NFL, but I think, look, I can go overpay for anything. I can make bad decisions right now and go buy anything I want and have a fun day driving a hot rod around town, but it might not be the greatest thing for me in the long term in my family.
It's a great point, and I was going to bring that up as well. Their team build is different than anybody else's over the last decade. Trade first-round picks for Ramsey and Stars and Brandon Cooks. I mean, they're not all superstars. But I also adore the chance that they decided to do things differently, and that they don't send their scouts to the combine. Like they see the scouting process a little bit different than everybody else. The team build better than everyone else. And where I'll fight you on your point is, yeah, they went a million years with no first-round picks, and anyone could, fantasy football trade these first-round picks away. But they were masterful in the mid-rounds because they worked the comp game incredibly well. So they were still near the top of the league in picks made, just not first-rounders.
Right.
And you end up with the Cups and the Kuas and,
I do think that a lot of these teams at the top, they're playing the comp game really well, and I will absolutely give you that. And so they put together a plan and they stuck with it, right? And so for that, I give them credit. And I do like when teams do things differently. I like when there's a team over here that's conservative, wants to run the ball all the time. They're going to be hard nosed and they're going to play defense. And there's a team over here that spreads it out and chucks the heck out of the ball all the time and does crazy stuff. I like that about the league. I don't want there to just be one stagnant idea and every team running the same schemes all the time. I want things to be different in different cities. I like that.
Last thing about the Rams, too, that I probably would have had them lower if it wasn't for last year. I mean, last year was the first, we can't throw first-round picks and buy everything we want. I thought this team would be one of the worst in the league whenever that time hit. And they were very, very competitive. You know?
And again, I would kind of put that on the coaching side than the defense side. I would definitely have the Baltimore Ravens, who are at number 5 on this list, ahead of the Rams. And, Eric DeCosta's doing things great, but, he just took the same plan that Ozzie Newsome already had going with the Ravens. And it was like, this is how we do things, and let's keep it going. So this is, hat tip to Ozzie Newsome and the path that this Ravens team was set on for a long time. Under Harbaugh as the head coach. They're well coached, but they're a stable organization. Just respect the way they do things. And the Ravens deserve to be very high on this list as they are.
Yeah, I have great respect for their organization. They're obviously the Steelers' biggest rival, and I think they view players very similarly. The Ravens and Steelers, we make jokes about it all the time. And the other things I'll give them credit for is it hasn't been true as much the last year or two, but they've been the best in the league working the comp game since pretty much the comp game came around. And they're not afraid to take the Kyle Hamilton, the Tyler Linderbaum that doesn't play a premium position that is clearly the best football player on the board.
And don't forget their star quarterback. And he was a player that the league didn't know what to do with at the time. And now is a prototype that teams are trying to find someone that dynamic at quarterback in Lamar Jackson. And they traded up to get him at the end of the first round, realizing, man, the league is just undervaluing this player, and went and got him and stopped his fall out of the first round in 2018.
I don't think I've ever told you this story, but I have to say it real quick on the air. I'm always down there for the Steeler drafts. And the Steelers picked at the end of the round that year, and they took Terrell Edmonds. So a couple picks shortly after, Coach Tomlin, Kevin Colbert, all those guys are walking into the press room, where they do their press conferences. And I don't know Coach T that well. And I'm not even sure if he knows who I am. But he overheard me talking to the media as he's walking right past me. I said, the Ravens just took Lamar. And he flips around, stares at me. He's like, the Ravens took Lamar. I'm like, yeah, coach. He's like, oh. Then he said a lot of bad words.
He's like, I don't know what to do with them, but I hope
I don't want to play against them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Next, we'll talk about the bottom of the GM rankings. And guess what? It's mandatory time in the offseason. Yeah. What does that mean for the NFL? This episode of Peacock and Williamson is sponsored by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And you know what time it is on the sports calendar? It's June. That means mandatory mini camps starting around the NFL. Still a lot of big bets to be made on NFL futures in the 2024 NFL season. But it's also winner take all time in the NBA and NHL playoffs, in NBA finals. And FanDuel gives you a shot of bringing home a big W of your own, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Any sport you can imagine, you can find that action at FanDuel. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So that we went through the top 5 there. It goes to remind folks here, and you can find the whole list at NBCsports.com. We got the Chiefs 1, Niners 2, Eagles 3, Rams 4, Ravens 5. Then you've got Brad Holmes and the Detroit Lions, Brandon Beane and the Bills coming up next, Brian Gutekunst and the Packers, Jerry Jones and the Cowboys at 9, John Schneider of the Seahawks. That rounds out the top 10. Matt, any problems with the rest of the top 10 there? Any notes before we get to the bottom of the list?
No problems. 2 small notes is this will be a defining offseason and time for Brandon Beane in Buffalo. I mean, chapter 1 of the Josh Allen era is closed, and now it's chapter 2. There's no more Mitch Morse and the safeties and foundational players. So that's huge to me. And to go back to the start of the podcast, Gutekunst in Green Bay, he doesn't have an owner. So, he has a way different way of doing things.
I will say with Gutekunst and the Packers, a lot of credit should go to, and I think maybe one of the most underrated coaches in the NFL right now is Matt LaFleur and the job he's done, and
Agreed.
Them developing that quarterback and that young passing game. He deserves a lot of credit for what has gone right there. And so just, a lot of these teams, when they're really good, it's not just one thing usually, because if you got a bad coaching staff and you can be a great GM, you got bad ownership, it's going to be rough for you. And so in Green Bay, you got no ownership really to deal with traditionally, and then you got a really great coach. So that helps. And that's a good job to have, I think, if you are Brian Gutekunst.
Yep. And good for him. He's done very, very well, but his job's different than everybody else's.
And obviously the job that Jerry Jones has done, we talked about how different teams are done differently. And obviously there's a lot of right and left hand men in the front office to help the Jones family do their thing as GMs officially of the team. Jerry Jones and his son, Stephen Jones, and, those other family members in the draft room every year as well. They've done a really good job for, an ownership led group. And so got to give them credit for what they've been able to do building their franchise.
And I don't think I'm going on a limb here to say Jerry has a big ego, but they've drafted as well as anyone. And I think he defers to their draft guy. He doesn't interfere too much, and they draft really, really well.
And I'm trying to pull it up right now. Because I'm blanking on his name.
I know I wanted to say and give him credit.
Main guy deserves a lot of credit there, and I think he's well compensated. And I think some teams have tried to pry him away. I
can't imagine what he makes a year. It's a lot. Just
for
be in charge of Cowboys draft, and that's your only job.
Yeah, for a non-GM, he's got to be really high on the list. And Will McClay is the
you beat me to
it. Vice President of Player Personnel is the official title for Will McClay. Very well thought of around the league, and maybe someday he'll get out there and GM, but I think he's taken care of. Doesn't have to talk to the media all the time and stuff like that.
Just watch tape and grade players. That'd be awesome. And people like you and I can't come up with his name off the tip of their tongue. Leave me alone.
Right, exactly.
I can walk around the mall and no one knows who I am. Great.
Okay, let's count from the bottom up. Now, new GMs, you can't really rank them yet. We'll see how Dan Morgan and the Panthers put things together, if he's able to overcome, I think, what has been kind of poor ownership there. We got Joe Ortiz with the Chargers. Adam Peters, I love how that has started for the Commanders there in Washington. Tom Telesco with the Raiders now. Elliot Wolf takes over for Bill Belichick and the Patriots. So, we'll see how those things go. They are unranked on this list, but here's the bottom up from 27. And it starts with Trent Baalke and the Jacksonville Jaguars at 27. Then George Paton, the Broncos at 26. Monty Ossenfort, the Cardinals, 25. Rand Carthon, the Titans, 24. And Joe Shane of the Giants at 23. So that's the bottom 5. And off the air, we talked about this list. I think the big problem we both have is Monty Ossenfort and the Cardinals, who I think have done a phenomenal job with what he was given there. I don't believe he's bottom 5. I think he probably should be closer to top 5 from what I've seen during his time. It's just, needs more time to see the fruition of what he's done there so far.
Yep. I mean, to defend Pat, I agree that there aren't a lot of easy ones to say, boy, he stinks. And you also have to give the benefit of the doubt to those who have done it a long time. Mickey Loomis, where Ossenfort doesn't have the body of work. But considering what he inherited in Arizona, I love what he's done. A lot, almost an entire roster makeover that's probably in stage 4 out of 10. One more big draft and a couple more pieces. This team might be the Niners' successor in the West. Who knows?
And, a lot was made of they didn't even get the coaches they wanted. It looks like they put together a pretty good coaching staff as well.
Yes. I love schematically how they play. The more I study the Cardinals from last year, I thought, like many, that they got the bottom of the barrel, the coaches. Nobody wants to go there. But on both sides of the ball, they scheme things up extremely well. And I'm sure Ossenfort had something to do with those hires, of course.
I've seen Trent Baalke with the 49ers clash with Jim Harbaugh back in the day, did just some really head-scratching stuff, and he's just got some blind spots as a GM. And, seeing a lot of those problems with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're not in the worst place, but, I can't argue that he needs to be higher than anybody else on this list. George Paton and the Broncos, it's a tough scene over there if the other Paton doesn't really make things go.
Russell Wilson trade doesn't look so great.
Firings are going to be happening over there in George Paton and George Paton's Broncos. Still kind of don't know what to think about Rand Carthon's Titans right now. Joe Shane and the Giants, really it's the Daniel Jones thing. They didn't draft him, but they did re-up him, and I'm still Like, you got to figure out quarterback, or you're not going to have a job, Joe Shane. That's kind of what I'm looking at with the New York Giants here. And then they're like, oh, we love Drew Lock is going to come in. And like, okay, you're going to hook your wagon there. Cool. Good luck. Ryan Poles and the Bears at 22. I've really liked what they've done so far. Ryan Poles.
Yes.
And so I would probably put him higher than some of these other GMs like Terry Fontenot of the Falcons. What has Terry Fontenot and the Falcons done other than be pretty darn mediocre for a long time? So I would take some of these other young up and coming builds over what Terry Fontenot is doing.
100% agree on Poles. I mean, other than the Claypool trade, I don't have a lot of qualms, but so what? One bad move. As I'm just real quick on the bottom two. Yeah, I think George Payton and Trent Baalke should be at the bottom. And I've said this a lot, but I think it's really important that every year the Jaguars spend in free agency, and every year they cut someone from 2 years ago that they spent in free agency on. And by the way, talk about benefits of having different coaches or quarterbacks or owners. You're in Florida. Why does that matter? They don't have state income tax. It's much easier to go get a free agent to come to Florida. It doesn't have to pay, you know how much millions of dollars these guys pay in state income tax?
A lot of great NFL players came from Florida, so they'd be going home.
They'll go home, right? Yeah. It should be a great job.
Absolutely. All right. So you can find the whole list. Ones we didn't mention are probably in the middle somewhere at NBCSports.com from RotoPat. At RotoPat did this article. Mandatory minicamp time, mandatory workouts happening this portion of the offseason here in June before we take a break and come back at training camp. So just look out for that this week. Some players not showing up gets a little bit more serious when it's mandatory and not voluntary workouts, Matt.
Yep. We mailbagging it up tomorrow? Is that the plan?
We are mailbagging it up. All right, tomorrow. Cool. Yeah, thanks for reminding me there. At BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. That's where to tag us on Twitter to get your questions in. And, of course, you can drop a question in the YouTube comments. Make sure you subscribe while you're there or anywhere you are listening to this podcast. Matt and I back tomorrow. Peacock and Williamson.